5 decks that I'm going to be playing on day 1 of Hearthstone's Festival of Legends expansion. This is actually my second attempt at this video. The first attempt was a massive fail. I actually put it out on YouTube, and very quickly some people began to inform me that I had some cards that were actually rotating out of standard listed in those decks. So I'm just going to go ahead and hold my L here, and we're going to take another shot at it. If you did point out to me in the comments that I had some rotating cards, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You saved me. Getting back to the decks. Big Paladin here. This was a deck that I erroneously included some rotating cards in. The deck really revolves around Kangor, being able to cheat out these big minions. You can see we have a lot of big minions down here at the high end of the curve. And really the beginning of the curve is really just ways that we want to be able to survive. So you're going to see things that will give our hero attack to be able to remove the board. Of course, equality in combination with a buffed consecration that's coming back into the core set. A little bit of healing and card draw, as well as additional card draw in the form of Service Bell. Muster for Battle and Jury Duty, both really just putting some minions on the board, again, in the early game just to be able to help us survive. And then by the time we can actually get down Kangor, it has Lifesteal, and it's going to give Lifesteal to every minion that it's going to be pulling out of our hand here. So really, really strong card with a really strong effect. Taking a look at the higher end of the deck now for those big minions. I've included one copy of Lead Dancer here. It's really just a redundancy for Kangor. It's going to give us an additional opportunity to be able to get Kangor on the board. The only card in the deck that has less than 3 attack is going to be Kangor themselves. And so that's just going to be a way to make sure that we can get this win condition down onto the board. A couple of Masked Revelers here. Again, a little bit of redundancy to try to make sure that we get Kangor out on the board, as well as all of the other minions that we have included. If a 2/2 copy comes down as the Masked Reveler dies, we're not going to be feeling all that bad about it. We've got the Colossal Minion. Of course, you have to have Rag in a deck like this. Tyrion, being able to go face with that weapon swing time after time is going to be a lot of damage, and could potentially end up with multiple Tyrions. Again, thinking about the Masked Revelers dying here. Anoya Troop, really solid defensive card. It's going to put a lot of 1/2s in the way when it dies, and really maybe protect some of the bigger minions as we're able to get those out onto the board. We, of course, include Neptulon. If this card sticks, even just the 2/2 version from a Masked Reveler, it basically just ends the game as your opponent can't remove it. They just take a ton of damage on the following turn. Thaddeus also included in this. If we can get out a cheaper Thaddeus, even if it's only the 2/2 copy, or certainly if it has Lifesteal, it can allow us to be able to play additional big minions and just create an overwhelming board for our opponent. And then to round out the deck, we do have just one copy of Stoneborn General here. Again, just a nice, big, solid minion. If we're able to get it out onto the board, it's going to be really, really good for our game plan. One of the question marks I have about this deck is the Harmonic Disco. Not quite sure how good it's going to be. All of these cards that swap from turn to turn, they're going to be just a little bit awkward in certain spots. Certainly, we would rather discover the 5-drop. Maybe we could potentially hit a Kangor off of that. Outside of that, it really just gives us something to do on turn 5, again, if we just miss the Kangor. Big Paladin, looking to put big minions on the board, and then find lethal with those big minions punching our opponent in the face. I definitely want to be playing a Hunter deck on day 1. Typically what we see is that Hunter decks tend to be more aggressive, and they tend to do really well in an early part of an expansion. People are going to be playing weird decks, and Hunter is just a way to be able to punish that. And typically what I like to think is the entire first week of an expansion, it's people playing bad decks poorly until the decks get figured out and people learn the optimal ways to be able to play them. Hunter can be a good way to be able to punish that. So this is just a Naga Hunter, so of course it's going to revolve around the synergy between all of the different Naga we have, as well as the fact that they can capitalize on spells being played. So you can see here, we're running Barb Nets, bunch of bananas, just some cheap spells to be able to power those interactions with the Naga, as well as the new Barrel of Monkeys. Being able to summon a 1/4 isn't all that great, but the spell is repeatable. We have up to 3 copies of this card, and just being able to potentially buff like a Slither Spear, or getting the damage off of the Raj Najan, or even just being able to take advantage of the new card, Aerosmith, being able to get additional damage into our opponent's board, and hopefully our opponent's face, as that board ends up being cleared here. We're also including the most important cards of the Wild Seed package, that being Spirit Poacher and Wild Spirits. Lots of potential there. A couple of copies of the new weapon. I would encourage you not to tunnel vision the new weapon as far as trying to get the biggest possible beast that you can possibly get. I think we really just want to punch face, and any minion that comes off of the death rattle of this, we're going to be happy with, even if it's only a 1 or 2 mana minion. It's really more just about the face damage in this particular deck. Pozic, the Audio Engineer, I think this card is going to see a lot of play in aggro decks. If you can get this down on curve on turn 4, your opponent doesn't really want to remove the card. because they don't want to put 2 3/3s on our side of the board, but they also can't really afford to take that 5 damage face, especially against an aggro deck. And then we round out the deck with Queen Ashara. Again, lots of spells in this deck to be able to activate the Queen Ashara. And again, I would encourage you not to tunnel vision. I think a lot of times in every deck that Queen Ashara is played in, it's always, I just want to get the big and cheap Colossal. Could be better off with this deck actually taking the weapon, deal 2 damage every time you play a spell. It has 5 charges. It could be 10 additional face damage as we're playing lots of these other cheaper spells here. So a little bit concerned about the card draw in the deck. Conjured Arrow is included here, but typically as we get onto turn 6 and turn 7, we're hoping to really just be killing our opponents rather than attacking a minion with this and drawing cards. But outside of that, I feel like the deck should be in good shape and we should be able to get a lot of wins with it. Next up, we have Big Warlock here. So this deck really took a lot of inspiration from an existing deck, that being the Thaddeus Warlock. You can see here we're still running the Undead package of cards, where we have like the Amorphous Slime, the Infantry Reanimator, as well as the bigger Undead minions in Darkon and Thaddeus. And what we found with that deck is that it was a little bit too inconsistent. It's what I like to call a draw order deck. You definitely have to have the Slime in hand by turn 5, turn 6 at the latest. And then you have to have one of these big Undead minions to really be able to capitalize on that card as well. And so in order to try to make this deck a little bit more consistent, we've done exactly the same thing, but with the Demon package. So now we're running the Void Caller. We also have the Enhanced Dreadlords as well as the Mal'Ganis here. So the idea is if we don't hit the big Undead package, maybe we can hit the big Demon package. I do think there's still a little bit of concern about whether or not this deck is going to be consistent. I feel like there could be games where you draw like Void Caller and Amorphous Slime, which you would think that you're going to run away with the game at that point. But then if you don't actually draw the big corresponding minions, it could get awkward. Or if you have a Void Caller, but you have an Undead minion like Thaddeus, you can't actually get it out of your hand. So still definitely some potential for some awkward draws here, but it should make the deck just a little bit more consistent. Also, some of the cards that we've picked up with the core set rotation, having access to Armor Vendors, Defile coming back is huge. Hellfire being buffed to only 3 mana should increase the survivability of the deck a little bit, I hope. And then that's going to give us a little bit more time to be able to get some of these bigger minions cheated out of our hand. And then also Symphony of Sins making a cut here. I really like this card. In practice, it's going to be interesting to find out just how consistent it is. There are, I believe, 6 different symphonies, maybe even 7. Not totally sure on that. But you can only discover 3, so there's no guarantee you're going to get exactly the one you need. But as a comparison, I think about the Hunter Hero card, Tavish. When you would discover secrets, usually you could find what you wanted off the discover on that. So lots of upside to Symphony of Sins. We're just going to see if it's actually good enough to be able to make the cut in this deck or any deck whatsoever. Blackrock Warrior is next on the list of decks that I'm going to be playing on day 1. And the deck really revolves around Blackrock and Roll. I took a little bit of heat in the comments of one of my videos. I thought that this card could be exactly what Warrior needed to be able to create a win condition, because in a lot of these slower moving control style Warrior decks, you just don't have a way to win the game. And so once you run out of ways to be able to remove your opponent's side of the board, you actually just end up losing the game. I know some people are calling this a 5-mana do-nothing. The interesting thing here is, though, the first card that I really thought was a do-nothing card was the Warlock card Immolate for 4 mana. Destroy the cards from your opponent's hand in 3 turns. So you think about doing nothing for 2 turns to 3 turns, that's significantly different from doing nothing for this turn, but then potentially getting a payoff on the next turn. So I still think the card is probably going to be good enough. Definitely, we want to experiment with it. So you can see here, again, this deck, in the early game, we're really just trying to stay alive, and we want to get to the point where we can draw and play Blackrock and Roll, hopefully on turn 5. And then at that point, the top end of our deck with these big minions just get absolutely huge, and then our opponent is going to have a hard time really getting around these minions to be able to finish off our face. And then, of course, with the Ziliax here, we have the potential for a lot of healing in the deck. You're also going to notice Last Stand is included in here. Top minions in the deck would be Ziliax, as well as the 2 Silver Fury Stalwarts. So if we're able to buff with Blackrock and Roll, and then we get the Mana Thirst off of the Last Stand to be able to hit some of these minions, they just get so big that in the case of Ziliax, it's a huge heal. And with the Silver Fury Stalwarts, it's just a card that our opponent is going to have to get through the hard way, likely just punching into it with minions or their face if they have that option. Without some type of removal that can affect this card, it could just win the game exactly on the spot. Then you can also see we're running the Remornia. Again, we get this in our hand after trading with a minion on the board. We can punch our opponent in the face. This can potentially get really big. It would be 12 attack after the Blackrock and Roll. And then Trench Stalkers, again, if these are buffed by Blackrock and roll 17 attack, and that's going to be 18 health. So when they go into our opponent's face, again, it's just an absolute metric ton of damage. So definitely very excited to be able to get in and try out this form of Control Warrior. And last but not least, we get down to Outcast Demon Hunter. The Outcast package looking to be pretty good now that this core set expansion is going to be going through. Lots of the lesser Outcast cards are actually going to be rotating. And so you can see here 2 copies of Calamity's Grasp. Add a random Outcast card to your hand. There's really not going to be all that many bad or unplayable Outcast cards, if any at all, after the core set rotation goes through, as well as the sets from the previous Hearthstone year rotating to Wild. And so I really like being able to add random Outcast cards to our hand. It's a form of resource generation. And then we also have the potential to be able to add just extra Vengeful Wallopers to our hand. Being able to get these babies down with Rush, potentially at 0 mana 5/5s, is going to be absolutely insane for the deck. And then you can see here as we move through the deck, we just have additional Outcast cards, again, to be able to reduce the cost of the Vengeful Wallopers. Illidari Studies, this is going to provide us with some additional flexibility in being able to discover an Outcast card, as well as being able to reduce the cost of the next one by 1. Bibliomite's actually just a very, very strong card. A 5/4 on turn 2 is going to be really good. I expect this to play like an aggro deck, and so being able to get a 5/4 on the board very early is certainly very, very strong. A couple of instrument techs here to be able to tutor out our weapons. Instrument tech, likely a card I think that's going to see a lot of play for any class that's wanting to tutor out any kind of weapons. Security here, being able to summon Rush minions. Of course, Outcast, we get the third 1/1 with Rush. Rush minions have a lot of synergy with the legendary Halveria. Just being able to buff your board every time a Rush minion attacks, it's going to be able to increase the damage on the board a significant amount. It's kind of like the Outcast Demon Hunter version of Bloodlust. Should be very, very strong. Then you see here just additional Outcast cards. We do have a little mana cheat, some additional resource generation in the form of additional Outcast cards. Card draw in the form of Rush the Sage. Being able to draw 2 Rush minions and discount them should be very, very strong. And then again here, just adding random Outcast cards to our hand. This guarantees they're going to be in the Outcast position. They cost 2 less. I think almost every Outcast card is going to be playable. So you can play this and play 2 additional cards, unless you hit something like a Vengeful Walloper that is not going to be discounted all the way to 0. Or potentially if you have an I-Beam that's going to be in the Outcast position, it's going to be actually stuck at 1 mana. Of course, the weapons here, again, I don't think we want a tunnel vision on necessarily trying to draw as many cards as possible from this. We just equip the weapon, punch our opponent in the face for 8 damage over 2 turns, and any additional card draw we get out of it is actually just a cherry on top. Should be a very, very strong card. And then also Kayn Sun Fury rounding out the list. Again, this is an aggressive deck. It's going to allow us to be able to bypass our enemy's taunts. And you can see here, Pozic the Audio Engineer, once again included. I think it's going to be a fantastic card in every aggro deck. You really put your opponent in some awkward spots if you're able to get this down on curve or even on turn 5 with a hero power in this particular Demon Hunter deck. It's just going to be difficult for your opponent to be able to remove this and play 6 mana worth of 3/3s so that we don't get those minions on our side of the board. So very, very good card for an aggro deck. That's going to do it for the video. Once again, thank you so much to the people that pointed out my first video. Lots of errors, lots of mistakes. My apologies, but thank you for pointing that out. I'm Uncorrupt, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in Hearthstone's Festival of Legends.